You think you know how your day will end. You imagine the familiar routine, the quiet drive home, the comfort of predictability. But when a student offered to drive me that evening, nothing could have prepared me for what followed. What began as a simple act of kindness became a moment that unsettled me, challenged something deep within, and reminded me how unexpectedly life can reach into our hearts. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment which city you're listening from. Your support matters more than you know. Now, let's begin. I hadn't planned on staying late at the university that Thursday. It was supposed to be a short day. But as it often happens, one task led to another. Papers waiting to be graded, emails demanding replies, and a conversation with a colleague that stretched far beyond its intended time. By the time I finally gathered my belongings, the campus was washed in that golden late. Afternoon light makes everything feel suspended in time. Long shadows stretched across the pavement, as though the day itself was reluctant to let go. I wrapped my scarf tighter around my neck, surprised by a sudden chill despite the lingering warmth of the sun. When I reached the parking lot, my heart sank. The car refused to start. I exhaled slowly, already replaying the mental note I'd ignored for weeks: get the battery checked. Life, however, has a way of reminding you when you least expect it. Need a lift? The voice came from behind me. I turned, slightly startled. A young man stood a few steps away, keys loosely dangling from his hand. There was an easy confidence in his posture, but also something gentler, an openness that immediately softened my unease. "Oh," I said, blinking. "I think my car won't start. I was just about to call a cab." "I can drive you," he offered with a small, reassuring smile. "I'm Ethan, one of your students. From your literature seminar." Recognition settled in almost instantly. Ethan, quiet, who listened more than he spoke, whose comments always revealed careful thought rather than a need to impress. I hadn't known him well, but I remembered the steadiness he brought into the classroom. "That's very kind of you," I replied, a bit embarrassed. "I don't want to trouble you." "It's no trouble," he said easily. "I live nearby, it's on my way." I hesitated, scanning the nearly empty lot, no other cars moving, no voices. Just the crisp autumn air, faintly scented with fallen leaves. A cautious voice inside me protested, years of habit urging restraint, reminding me to think twice. But another part of me, quieter and older, recognized something else. That sometimes it's these small, unplanned moments that remind us we're still alive, still open to being surprised. "All right," I said finally. "Thank you, Ethan." We walked toward his car, the crunch of gravel beneath ours filling the comfortable silence. Conversation came easily. He asked about my day, not politely but with genuine curiosity. I found myself sharing more than I usually would: the frustrations, the small victories, the exhaustion that lingers beneath responsibility. He listened, truly listened, and with every mile, the weight of the day seemed to lift. As we drove, city lights flickered on one by one, the sky deepening into evening. There was a calm in the car, a sense of separation from the rest of the world. Ethan drove carefully, humming faintly along with the radio. I noticed details without meaning to: the steadiness of his hands, the quiet focus in his expression. I caught myself glancing at him. He was young, yes, but there was a depth there that surprised me. An earnestness that felt familiar, almost reflective of who I once was. For a brief, unsettling moment, the years between us didn't feel like a wall, but a bridge. Then, at a red light, he slowed and turned toward me. And suddenly, I noticed everything. The way the fading light caught in his hair, the slight curve of his smile, the calm certainty in his gaze. Something shifted inside me, soft but undeniable. It wasn't romance. Not in the way stories usually tell it. It was connection. The kind that arrives without warning. The kind that tightens your chest. Not with desire, but with awareness. With the realization that something meaningful is unfolding whether you are ready for or not. "Lauren," he said quietly. And in that moment, I understood that this drive home was no longer just a drive. It was the beginning of something I couldn't name, but would never forget. Almost shyly, he spoke again. "I hope this isn't too forward," he said, his voice lowering just slightly, "but I feel like I should tell you something. My heart skipped, the quiet hum of the car suddenly louder in my ears. I turned toward him, meeting his gaze. Yes, I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. He hesitated only for a breath, as if weighing the consequences of honesty. Then he continued. I admire the way you talk about your work. The passion you bring into it. I've noticed it for a while. He swallowed softly. I didn't want to say anything in class. I didn't want to make things awkward. But I felt like you deserved to know. I blinked, surprised but not alarmed. There was no threat in his words, no recklessness. Only sincerity. The kind that comes from someone choosing truth over silence. Warmth spread through me, unexpected and delicate. A blend of flattery, vulnerability, and something far more unsettling, a quiet thrill. For years, I had assumed that moments like this belonged to the past, sealed away with youth and possibility. And yet here I was, sitting in the dim glow of a city street, realizing that perhaps I had been wrong. Ethan, I said gently, resting my hand against his for just a moment. Not to encourage, not to retreat, only to acknowledge. Thank you for being honest. That truly means a lot. Relief softened his expression, and he smiled, small, grateful, restrained. We continued the drive in silence, but it was no longer empty, it was full. Almost sacred. I sensed then that this evening, this unplanned detour from routine, was becoming something more than coincidence. It was a moment suspended between the ordinary life I knew, and the extraordinary feeling of being truly seen. When we reached my home, streetlights flickering awake one by one, gratitude settled over me like a warm shawl. I hadn't expected to feel this energized, this quietly alive. From such a simple act of kindness. As I stepped out of the car, Ethan's hand brushed mine just briefly, just enough to linger in awareness. Nothing improper. Nothing rushed. But undeniably charged. Thank you for letting me drive you, he said softly. I smiled, my pulse betraying me in a way it hadn't in years. No, I replied, meeting his eyes. Thank you, Ethan, for everything. As I closed the door behind me, a realization unfolded with gentle clarity. Sometimes the smallest gestures carry the greatest weight. Sometimes a single evening can awaken something long forgotten. The next day, I found myself thinking about Ethan more than I expected. The feeling was strange, almost disorienting. My life had always been structured around schedules. Syllabi, responsibilities. Predictable. Safe. Yet that evening had reminded me that life still holds the power to surprise us. That dormant parts of ourselves can stir without warning. I tried to push the thoughts aside as I walked onto campus, coffee warming my hands, surrounded by the familiar hum of student voices. Everything looked the same. Every time I glanced across the room, a quiet part of me half expected to see him there. I half expected to see him everywhere, leaning casually against a doorway, or moving between rows of desks with that same quiet confidence. And when I finally did see him, standing near the faculty lounge with a notebook held close to his chest, my body reacted before my thoughts could catch up. A small jolt stirred inside me. Sharp and undeniable. It was the kind of response that reminds you the body remembers things to rationalize away. Good morning, Lauren, he said. His tone easy, unguarded, as if yesterday had been nothing more than a passing moment. Good morning, Ethan, I replied, smiling. There was a trace of awkwardness. Yes, the faint echo of what had passed between us, but it was softened by warmth. Neither of us seemed eager to define anything, and that, strangely, made it easier to breathe. He asked about the lecture, about a reading he'd found challenging, and as we spoke, I realized how natural it felt. The flutter in my chest didn't disrupt the conversation, it coexisted with it. There was an honesty in the exchange that felt rare. Words weren't rushed. Listening mattered as much as speaking. It felt less like a conversation, and more like a shared pause of everyday life. Later that afternoon, as I gathered my things to leave, my thoughts drifted back to the night before, the stalled car, the quiet drive, the way he had guided the conversation without ever forcing it. On impulse, I sent a short message. Thank you again for driving me yesterday. That was very kind of you. I didn't expect a response so quickly. But within minutes my phone vibrated. It was no trouble at all, Lauren. I enjoyed the conversation more than I expected. I hope you got home safely, and that your car behaved today. I smiled, feeling my heartbeat quicken just slightly. There was no performance in his words. No attempt to impress. Just sincerity, and that was what unsettled me most. That evening I found myself restless, unable to settle into the familiar comfort of routine. Dinner went untouched longer than usual. The book I opened remained unread. My thoughts kept circling back to him, to the attentiveness, the quiet steadiness. Before I could overthink it, I typed another message. If this isn't too forward, would you like to meet for coffee sometime? To continue our conversation. The moment I pressed send, vulnerability washed over me. That familiar ache. The risk that comes with hoping, with allowing yourself to open a door without knowing what waits on the other side. His reply came quickly. A cafe near campus. Quiet. Tomorrow if that works. The simplicity of it made my breath catch. The next day I walked a mix of anticipation and unease. It was the kind of place that felt intentionally intimate. Soft music. Warm lighting. The scent of coffee wrapping around you like reassurance. Sunlight filtered through the windows, settling in golden patches across the wooden tables. Ethan was already there, seated toward the back. Relaxed, yet alert. When he saw me, he stood. Lauren, he said, a small smile forming. I'm really glad you came. Me too, I replied, taking the seat across from him. The table between us felt closer than it should have been. Intimate. My chest fluttered with an unfamiliar energy. Something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. We ordered coffee. And as we waited, I sensed it clearly, this wasn't just a meeting. It was a continuation. A moment quietly unfolding into something neither of us had named, but both of us felt. As the conversation settled into an easy rhythm, I became aware of how effortlessly words flowed between us. There was no strain, no need to perform. Thoughts surfaced naturally, small observations. Passing frustrations from the day, half-remembered stories that usually stayed tucked away. He listened with an attentiveness that felt increasingly rare. Never interrupting, never judging. When he spoke, his responses carried a quiet intelligence, thoughtful rather than impressive. And it left me with the unmistakable feeling of being truly seen. Something subtle was forming beneath the surface of our exchange. With each passing moment, the world beyond the cafe softened, blurred, until it seemed to recede altogether. Time slowed. The clink of cups and low murmur of other conversations faded into irrelevance, leaving only the charged space between us. We laughed at a shared memory from one of his seminars, an unguarded, genuine sound, and I found myself noticing details I hadn't intended to see. The way his eyes creased when he smiled. The deliberate calm of his gestures. The warmth threaded through his voice. Each detail felt like another quiet stitch, weaving a connection neither of us had planned for, yet both of us were beginning to recognize. As the afternoon light shifted, stretching long shadows across the cafe floor, something changed. Ethan's expression softened, his gaze lingering just a moment longer than before. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. Lauren, he said gently, I know the age difference between us is obvious. And maybe that should make this simpler. But it doesn't. It feels like there's something here. Something real. Something worth exploring if you feel it too. The honesty of it caught me off guard. A rush of emotion surged through me, surprise, yes, but also a quiet exhilaration. He had given words to what I had sensed but refused to name. There was vulnerability in his admission, and in that openness, I felt my own defenses loosen. I feel it, I said softly. The words were simple yet heavy with meaning. It's unexpected, but I do. In that moment there was no urgency. No pressure to define what this was becoming. Just two people acknowledging something rare, something quietly extraordinary, without the need for promises or grand declarations. For the first time in years, I felt the unmistakable thrill of genuine connection, unburdened by pretense, unclouded by expectation. When we left the cafe and walked side by side beneath the tree-lined street, the evening light wrapped the city in a warm, forgiving glow. The day stretched ahead of us like a promise not yet spoken aloud. I was struck by the realization that life still had the power to surprise. That even after believing certain chapters were closed, the heart remembered how to feel. And as that awareness settled in, I understood this moment was not an ending, but the quiet beginning of something I couldn't yet name. In the days that followed, my thoughts returned to Ethan more often than I anticipated. Not with the urgency of infatuation, but with something steadier, more deliberate. It felt mature, almost reverent. I had spent decades living within carefully drawn boundaries, but with him, a long sealed door inside me had begun to open, allowing a forgotten light to spill in. Our communication unfolded slowly. We didn't speak every day, but there was a rhythm to it. A measured pulse that grew stronger without demanding attention. His messages carried intention. He chose words carefully, not to impress but to understand. He asked questions that lingered, that made me pause and reflect. And every time my phone lit up with his name, a quiet thrill passed through me, like a shared secret taking shape. A few evenings after our cafe meeting, he sent a message that made my breath catch. "Would you like to go for a short drive tonight?" he wrote. "There's a lookout I love. The city lights, you should see them." I hesitated, the cautious voice in my mind whispering reminders of distance and restraint. But beneath that hesitation was the same gentle pull I'd felt since the first day he offered to drive me home. That inexplicable sense that life was offering a brief opening, an invitation to step beyond the familiar and into something quietly profound. "I'd like that," I replied, surprising even myself. I surprised myself with how steady my voice sounded. That evening, I dressed with quiet intention. Nothing elaborate, just a soft sweater and a scarf wrapped loosely against the early winter cold. It felt important not to overthink it, to let the moment remain unforced. When Ethan arrived, he greeted me with the same calm warmth that had made our first drive feel effortless, as though comfort came naturally to him. As we moved through the streets, the city unfolding in a blur of muted lights, I became aware of small, intimate details. The relaxed confidence in the way his hands rested on the steering wheel. The occasional glance in my direction, brief but deliberate, accompanied by a knowing smile that seemed to say more than words could. There was no urgency between us, no unspoken demand. Only the quiet rhythm of shared presence, steady and reassuring. The lookout was exactly as he had described. A narrow road opened into a hilltop view, where the city stretched out below us, its lights shimmering like stars scattered carelessly across the earth. Above, the sky deepened from twilight blue into a rich indigo, night settling in gently rather than all at once. We stood side by side at the railing, the cold air brushing against our faces, and a profound stillness settled over me. "This is beautiful," I murmured, almost to myself, as though saying it aloud might preserve the moment. "It's my favorite place," Ethan replied quietly. "I come here when I need perspective. When I need to remember that life is bigger than whatever feels heavy." I nodded, understanding immediately. So often the world felt compressed, shrunk by obligations, expectations, routines that left little room to breathe. But standing there, with the city spread beneath us and his presence close, something loosened inside me. It felt possible to breathe more deeply, to feel more honestly. At first we spoke about small things, books we were reading, amusing quirks of the university, but gradually, without noticing when it happened, the conversation shifted. He asked about my past, my family, the paths I had chosen and the ones I sometimes wondered about. I answered with a candor that surprised me. These were truths I hadn't shared in years, not because they were hidden, but because no one had asked in quite this way. He listened with quiet intensity, never pushing, never interrupting, yet making each word feel held. Then, almost instinctively, he reached for my hand. The gesture was slow, deliberate, not impulsive, not demanding. I didn't pull away. Instead, warmth spread through me, a mixture of surprise and ease, as though that simple touch acknowledged something already understood between us. "Lauren," he said softly, turning his hand so our fingers intertwined. "I know this isn't conventional, but I don't want to pretend I don't feel it. There's something important here. Something I don't want to ignore." I drew in a steady breath, my heart beating faster but sure of itself. "I feel it too," I admitted. "It's unexpected, but it doesn't feel wrong. It feels worth paying attention to." The air around us seemed to hum, charged with a delicate tension, not reckless, not desperate, but alive. There was awareness of boundaries, yes, but also a quiet acknowledgement that some connections move beyond age, expectation, or circumstance. We stood there for what felt like hours, wrapped in silence and city light, aware that something fragile and meaningful was taking shape. Something neither of us was ready to define, yet neither of us wanted to turn away from. The city lights shimmered beneath us, the cold air softened by the warmth that existed so effortlessly between us. There was no urgency, no need to define anything. Only the shared awareness that, for this brief stretch of time, life had offered something rare, an unguarded moment of seeing and being seen, without pretense. The drive back was quiet, filled with the low hum of the engine and the clean scent of winter slipping in through a barely open window. And somewhere between the passing streetlights, a realization settled over me, unexpected and startling in its clarity. I hadn't felt this alive in decades. Not this alert to every nuance. The cadence of his voice, the stillness between words, the way anticipation tightened gently in my chest. This wasn't simply attraction, it was recognition. The unsettling, exhilarating awareness that someone had entered my life and shifted its shape, without asking permission. When I stepped into my apartment that night, the silence felt altered, charged. The room seemed to hold an afterimage of the evening, a quiet energy, a lingering warmth born of closeness and honesty. I understood then that even at 66, life was not finished surprising me. It could still invite intimacy, still demand vulnerability, still awaken something tender and alive, and with that realization came a feeling both fragile and electric. Hope. After the night at the lookout, the change in me was subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone else. No dramatic turning point, no declaration that everything was different, and yet it was. My days carried a soft anticipation, a sense that something meaningful was unfolding just beneath the surface. I began to notice the world more sharply. The way sunlight pooled along the edge of my living room floor in the morning. The distant sound of traffic on an otherwise quiet street. The easy laughter of strangers passing by. And threaded through it all was Ethan, his presence lingering like a familiarity I hadn't realized I'd been missing. We continued to see one another in simple, unremarkable ways. Walks through the park. Coffee in the late afternoon. Books exchanged with thoughtful notes tucked inside. Nothing hurried. Nothing careless. Each meeting held a quiet intensity that made the rest of the world recede. I began to notice the nuances of him, the brief pauses before he spoke of something personal. The care he took in his questions. The way he listened not to respond, but to understand. There was something humbling in it. A generosity of attention that made me feel fully present, fully acknowledged. One evening, crisp and clear, he suggested another drive. "There's a road I like," he said, his eyes carrying that calm certainty I had come to trust. "It's lined with trees. The sunset hits it just right. I thought you might enjoy it." I agreed without hesitation. There was comfort now in the ritual of leaving the familiar behind, of letting him guide me towards something unknown yet safe. As the city slipped away and the open road stretched ahead, serenity mingled with anticipation. The asphalt glowed softly beneath the fading sun, leaves whispering overhead as the wind moved through them. Ethan glanced at me then, his expression open, unguarded. "Lauren," he said quietly. "This us. It means more to me than I expected." I felt the weight of his words settle into the silence. "It means a lot to me too," I replied honestly. "More than I thought it would." And as the road carried us forward, framed by light, I'd understood that whatever this was becoming, it was being built not on impulse, but on intention, slow, deliberate, and quietly profound. I've spent so many years living by plans and routines, measuring my days by responsibility and restraint. It's rare, almost startling, to meet someone who reminds you what it feels like to be fully awake again. Ethan reached for my hand, his fingers brushing mine with a gentleness that felt intentional rather than tentative. The touch was simple, unassuming. Yet it carried a weight that settled deep inside me. I didn't pull away. I welcomed it. Warmth spread through me, steady and grounding. A quiet reminder that genuine connection doesn't vanish with time, it waits, patient, for the right moment to return. We arrived at a small overlook just as the sun was sinking low, the valley below washed in soft shades of gold and fading rose. The air was crisp, scented faintly with pine and damp earth, and the silence around us felt meaningful, dense with things neither of us rushed to say. We stood side by side, close enough to feel each other's presence, far enough to honor the stillness. "I've been thinking," Ethan said at last, his voice low and careful, "about how unexpected this is. How unlikely it all seemed at first, and yet here we are." He paused, as if weighing his honesty. "I don't want to let go of this. Of what's growing between us. Even if it doesn't fit neatly into expectations." His words caught in my chest, stirring emotions I hadn't prepared for. "Neither do I," I whispered. "I wasn't looking for this, not now. Not at this stage of my life." I met his gaze. "But it feels real, important, alive." He looked at me then, not casually, not politely, but with an attention that felt rare and unguarded. There was no urgency in his expression, no attempt to claim or define, only recognition. And in that moment, something settled quietly inside me. A realization both humbling and profound. Life doesn't stop offering wonder, just because we assume our time for it has passed. Sometimes it waits for us to slow down enough to notice. We stayed there until the sun disappeared completely, the valley below darkening as the sky deepened into indigo. City lights flickered on in the distance, tiny constellations mirroring the stars above. Ethan's hand remained in mine, steady and warm, reminding me that connection, real connection, doesn't follow timelines or rules we impose on it. The drive back was gentle, unhurried. We spoke softly, sharing small hopes, quiet dreams. Fragments of ourselves offered without performance. I noticed how natural it felt to sit beside him, to lean into shared presence without losing myself, without fear of judgment. What was forming between us wasn't fueled by urgency or illusion, but by trust, slow, deliberate, and unexpectedly deep. When we arrived at my home, Ethan lingered for a moment before stepping back. "Thank you," sank his voice, sincere, almost reverent, "for letting me be part of your life. For trusting me." I squeezed his hand briefly. "And thank you," I replied, "for reminding me that life still holds surprises. That connection can find you anywhere, at any time. And that it's never too late to feel alive again." He smiled, a quiet, knowing smile, and our goodbye carried no sense of ending, only continuation. As I closed the door behind me, the warmth of his presence lingered, like an echo that refused to fade. Later that night, sitting beneath the soft glow of my living room lamp, I reflected on how quickly life can open unexpected doors. How a single act of kindness, a drive home, a shared conversation, can unfold into something transformative. I understood then that intimacy and emotional renewal are not reserved for youth. They belong to anyone brave enough to remain open, to honor trust, and to accept the quiet miracles life offers when we least expect them. As sleep finally claimed me, I smiled softly, knowing that tomorrow, and the days beyond, held the promise of shared laughter, honest conversation, and the kind of human connection that makes life feel truly alive.